Welcome back to the i427 garage, everybody. We are working on the Type 65 Coupe today. We're working on fuel lines. All right, so I kept teasing, I think in the last video, that I was postponing the fuel lines because I was waiting for a new tubing bender. And that arrived. It actually arrived while we were gone on our trip to Texas. So what I bought, I wanted something that had a little bit more leverage. And I'll show you what I was using before. So basically I bought this larger tubing bender from, you know, I know this company's like everywhere now, from Vivor. I actually bought it through Home Depot because I have an account with Home Depot. And so I looked on Home Depot, I looked on Walmart, I looked on Amazon, I looked on eBay, and for the cost of this plus the shipping, this was about the best deal on this size tubing bender. And I wanted something, like I said, with longer handles. So you can see the handles on this are about the distance between my fingers and my elbow. So that's pretty good amount of leverage when you want to bend the tubing. Now, if I was just bending the steel tubing that Factory 5 provides, which I have no problem using, I wouldn't need that. It's because I'm using stainless steel that I need the one with more leverage. And what I've been doing previously is I've been using the tubing bender that I've had for, oh God, 25, 30 years. And I have pipe extensions that I put on it to get more leverage, but it's a cast aluminum tubing bender. So eventually, with enough force, I'm gonna break the aluminum handles on it. So I don't want to do that. So I wanted to get something that was a little bit bigger. So that's what I've been using. And I started this morning bending the lines, and I think I got one kind of in place here. So you can see here, I've got this just temporarily held in place with a couple of tie wraps down the tunnel, and I'm gonna have to straighten out exactly where it goes. But you know, we don't do Type 65 Coupes all the time in the shop here. There are just far more Mark IVs out there than any other platform that Factory 5 sells. So, you know, we're primarily working on Mark IVs here all the time. Now, because of that, I am completely dependent on the assembly manual. And, you know, I'm going to go back to the assembly manual really quick. It's always the guys that don't read instructions that are the most critical of the Factory 5 assembly manual. And if you look at it as a step-by-step, you're going to be gravely disappointed because it's not a step-by-step. The Factory 5 assembly manual, regardless of which platform you're working on, is merely a guide. It gives you the basics of where everything goes and an overview on how you can do it or how it's done. So don't expect, you know, pictures at every step. Don't expect a point by point, you know, this is how you do it. As my buddy Jeff Kleiner always says, this is not IKEA furniture. You're building a car, and so you have to build in a little bit of flexibility, especially in an assembly manual, for those of you out there that are going to modify things or change things throughout the build. And so if you use the Factory 5 assembly manual as a guide, you're going to be a lot more better off than those guys that just simply start bolting stuff together. And in the case of this car, that's kind of what happened in a lot of things. We ended up having to take the gas tank out because the bumpers were installed and they weren't installed properly. The fins on the gas tank were never, you know, flattened out, and so when the tank went up, it split those little bumpers. So keep that in mind when you're building this stuff. Use that Factory 5 assembly manual as a guide. And so what I'm doing is I'm going through where they have the fuel lines outlined in the manual. My manual just happens to be on page about 170 through 174, I think. And it shows you where they would mount the fuel filter, and then out of the fuel filter, how it would cross over and run down the tunnel. And so that's what we've done. We've just mimicked what Factory 5 has suggested. Now, my first thought when running fuel lines down the tunnel was that I didn't think it was a good idea, and I still don't. However, with this car, we're going to be running a T56, and this has an independent rear suspension. So the drive shaft, no shit, it's going to be about 4 inches long. So it's basically going to be 2 universal joints with a 4-inch shaft in between it, and that's it. And we have over there a drive shaft loop that we're going to be welding to the frame. And it's 2.5 inches thick. So when you do the math, there's not going to be a whole lot of exposed area for the drive shaft to get out if a U-joint were ever to fail. So I'm fairly confident that running these down the tunnel are going to be just fine. And then we're going to also have our chassis harness running down through here. Our brake lines are already run down through the tunnel. With the Gen 3 Coupe, you just don't have the option of running it down the frame rails because there are no 4-inch round tubes running down the side of the car. So everything has to pretty much run through the center of the tunnel to get from the front to the back, or the opposite from the back to the front. So you're going to have to make some concessions on how you want to run this. Now, we talked about running like a 1.5-inch rigid pipe through the tunnel with the fuel lines inside of it. But then I started thinking about these fuel lines inside that pipe rattling around, because there's really no way to fasten them. I mean, they're not going to go anywhere because they're run inside the pipe, but you know, they're going to be rattling around. So I think what we've decided to just run them down the tunnel, just like Factory 5 shows in the manual, is going to be the best route forward. I'll let you know, as we continue with this build, if I have second thoughts about it. But as things stand now, I think running them down the tunnel is just our best bet. Now I've got this one in, and this is our return. So you can see our fuel filters right here. This is our return line from the fuel pressure regulator. And again, I've just got it held in with some tie wraps right here. And I've extended it past the fuel filter, and this will get an AN fitting on the end of it, and then it'll go into the return in our tank. And then we're going to get our feed line out of this side of our fuel filter and run it down the tunnel this way. And I have that one sitting right over here in the corner and ready to go in there. So let me kind of get that in place. I'm actually going to pull this one out because I have one bend left to do on the feed line. So if you look right here, this line right here is 90'd up, and I do not have that 90-degree bend on the piece over there in the corner. So I want to pull this one out. I want to lay them side by side because I've matched up all their bends so far. I want to bend that, it's not even a 90, I think it's like a 60-degree angle. I want to bend that 60-degree angle on there so that these will be side by each coming out of the tunnel. And then I'm going to figure out where to cut them. And once that's done, then I can go ahead and fasten them in place. All right, it's close to the end of the day. It's about 5:30. I normally don't tell you guys that, but I've been working all day on these fuel lines. I choose to start from the back and work my way to the front of the car. It just seems easier for me that way. It doesn't matter, because honestly, you're going to be putting flexible lines at the back and flexible lines at the front. At the front, you're going to use it so that the motor can move, and at the back, you want it just so that there's serviceability at the fuel pump if you ever have to take the fuel pump out. One part that I didn't leave flexible this time, and it's just because of where the fuel filter was I used I guess it's called it's still called a swivel, even though it's a straight fitting, right here at the fuel filter, because it was just too short of a spot to put a hose. And the hoses, honestly, they cost the same whether they're 2 inches long or whether they're 24 inches long. So I just eliminated an extra hose here. But let me turn the camera around. I'll show you what I've got starting here at the back. All right here is that fitting I was talking about. So the way I do these, I'll show you in just a minute, but this basically has a male end on the end of this fitting this side. And then this is a tube nut, and there is a sleeve inside of there. And the sleeve is cut at the same angle as the flare. So when all this is tightened up, and make sure you use a little bit of lube. I choose to use motor oil on all my fuel lines. Once you tighten that up good and tight, it's not going to leak. And this fitting isn't in here. We're going to still have to put some sealant on there, but it's close enough. Meaning it's not going to go that much farther in that it's going to change the location of this line. And all the lines still have to be strapped. They're just kind of held in with zip ties right now. So that's my feed line out of the filter, and we'll have a soft line from the gas tank to the inlet side of the filter. And then back here, this is my return from the fuel pressure regulator. And if you look, I made this so that I could get a strap for the hose that's going to come around the corner here and go into this fitting here. So I may drop a strap from this location down so that has something to tie to, because it may be a little floppy, but it's going to have a strap right here on the bottom of this frame member, so it should stay pretty secure. So I don't know. I'll be working on the strapping tomorrow, and I'll bring you back tomorrow for that. But that's kind of it at the back. And in the front, I just basically terminated them where I'm assuming Factory 5 has you terminate their lines. So I've got both the feed, which is on the left, and the return, which is on the right, terminating right here. They're at different lengths right now, but that's just because they're not strapped. So I've got to, once I get those all strapped in their locations, they'll be a lot closer to even right there. And then our fuel pressure regulator is probably going to go right over here, because the way the cowl comes on the front of the coupe up here, there's really not enough room to put it underneath here. And if you did, you probably wouldn't be able to get to it to adjust it. So we're probably going to put it out here somewhere. But we're going to have to make sure that we keep it low enough so that when the nose of the car goes on, the bonnet, that it's not going to interfere with the fuel pressure regulator either. One other thing we're probably going to do is we're going to make a removable panel for the top of this foot box so that we can get into the master cylinders if they ever need to be serviced or replaced. So that's kind of it on this, and then let me take you to the other side and we'll take a look at where they run down the tunnel. Again, they're not strapped right now, so I've just kind of got them zip tied in place. So you can see I got a zip tie right back here, and I got a zip tie right here, just hold them in place. And they're probably going to push over that way towards the driver's side. That's why I can get these and kind of manipulate them a little bit, get everything in line with the brake line that's already here, and get these strapped in place and looking really nice. And then we'll concentrate on getting the hoses probably after we get the motor set in. I just wanted to make sure that we're getting everything down the tunnel done, so that once the motor goes in, we're not fussing with everything in the tunnel. I am going to have to take a look at the emergency brake cables, because I think they can be routed a little bit better to keep them out of the way, because right now they're kind of flopping around and kind of in the way. All right, so I'll be back out here tomorrow. I'll bring you back then, and we'll get those lines strapped, and we'll get that all finished up tomorrow. All right, welcome to tomorrow, everybody. I've been working on the car for a couple hours. I've got the majority of the straps in place, but before I did that, I wanted to give you guys a little tip. And I know that a lot of you out there are going to be building the cars for aesthetics, meaning you want it to look really cool. But please don't sacrifice safety for looking cool. And I'm going to give you an example right here. When you're doing the straps and the hardware, it's easy to be tempted. For instance, all the brake lines in this were put together with these black straps. And you think, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is they're plastic. These things are just plastic. And you can see how easily they bend with my hand. In about 5 to 6 years, they're just going to disintegrate from just being exposed to the, the air and what have you. The sad thing is that these were put in with a lot of care. Someone wanted these to look really good. They went through the effort to drill and tap in every location and put in these black button head, Allen head screws. The problem is they're gonna the plastic straps are gonna fall apart in a matter of years. So just use what Factory 5 has provided you. They're not a bad looking strap. I mean, I have a number of them, but I have them in a bunch of different sizes. So these are the ones that we would use for the brake lines. These are 1/8 inch, but you can see I have 5/8, and these are the only two sizes that Factory 5 gives you, the 5/8 and the 1/8 inch. But I go ahead and I get them in other sizes. So I have them in 3/4. You can see I need to reorder my 3/4, 7/8, 1.25 inch, and then I have some oddball ones. And these are for like, we've used these in the past for like power steering hoses and stuff like that. Stuff that you want to make sure that they stay in place. And then, when you're looking at one of these straps, let's do 3/4 to 3/4. They're both 3/4 inch straps, but you can see the one on the right there is much more substantial than the one on the left. So when you're building your cars, just step back for a minute when you're going to do something for purely aesthetic reasons and think to yourself, is this going to last long term? And the reason I said that it's a shame that someone spent the time to drill and tap these screws are too small for the straps we use. These go right through the holes. So we drilled them out to 3/16 and we put 3/16 pop rivets in. This is the way that Factory 5 outlines in the build manual. I've never had a problem with one of these backing out. Once it's in, it's in. If you need to take it out, it's not a big deal. You drill out the pop rivet, and when you're done, you put a new one in. So that's kind of where I'm at on that stuff. Just be careful about some of this stuff that you're putting really hard work into your car, and then 2 or 3 years down the line, you're going to be doing your yearly inspection on your car, and you're going to find that your brake lines are all coming away from the chassis. So here's where we're at today. We've got the front strapped in place here, and you can see I've got the one on the inside here a little bit higher than the one on the right over here, and there's a good reason for that. One, the X frame right here is going up at an angle, and so I wanted to make sure it was longer to account for that. But secondly, I may have to put 90s on both of these. Now, I don't like using the swivel 90s, especially on fuel lines. But in this case, I don't think I have a choice, because I didn't want those fuel lines down here, because I want to give as much room for the transmission to slide in place when we set the engine. I didn't want them down here. So I wanted to make sure that they were up in an area where they weren't going to get hit. So that's why they ended up there. But secondly, I wanted them to be easily accessed at the back of the motor, because the motor actually sits pretty high in here. And if we needed to get to these, for any reason, I wanted to be able to get to them as well. So they ended up there. Now you can see we've got them strapped there. We've got them strapped right here. Grab a light here real quick. We've got them strapped right here. And then I've got them strapped back here at the back of the tunnel. Now, we still have a couple of straps in the back to put in, and I'm working on those now, but I wanted to get all these in place before I drop the car down. And obviously I wanted to grab the camera and show everybody what it ended up looking like before I went to the back, lowered the car down and all that. So all these are in, they're in place, and we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna drop the car down, and I'm gonna put the last few straps in place in the back of the car. I got a little distracted yesterday. I didn't get the straps all finished on the fuel lines, and so I finished those up this afternoon when I got home from work. I don't know if you can see this one right here, but I've got a strap right here on this one, so that's all good. And then what I went ahead and did is I put on the caps that I get from the fitting supplier. They have these little plastic caps that the fittings ship with, and so whenever I'm done, I always try to put those caps back on so that I don't get any garbage in the lines. So I've got those on. Those will stay in place until I get the soft lines all finished up. But I think that's going to wrap things up for today. The fuel lines actually came along pretty quickly. That new tool, the new bender, is like way better. I could make perfect bends with the bender that I was using before, but having to put two like cheater bars on there in order to get the stainless steel tubing bent, it was getting old. I'm doing too many of these cars lately, and I'm getting old. And so the new tubing bender just makes it a lot easier. So if you guys are enjoying the content here, as always, do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.